I felt like Patrick brought on this guy who knows nothing about Terrence's theory and had his own theory, which is that the universe doesn't have any other forces besides electricity.
Big debate with Terrence Howard happening.
Terrence Howard and I have been secretly communicating through about 5 different channels.
5 different channels?
5 different podcasters. Maybe you'd be the one to make it actually happen. Yeah, Patrick, Bet David gave me a name check while he was on with this kind of really disappointing example of a NASA physicist. This guy, Dr. Wei-Ping Yu, who Patrick's team actually got his name wrong on the show notes. That was kind of funny. Like, you don't even research this guy's name, how to spell it. That was kind of embarrassing. But, I like Patrick. He does some good stuff. but in this case, yeah, it was kind of a little bit embarrassing, I said, for Terrence, because he went on to talk about his theory, the linchpin, his theory of 1 times 1 equals 2, and his theory of, well, don't laugh, he's got a lot of mathematicians.
No, it's just bringing back memories. It was an incredible podcast.
Memories of a couple months ago. But now he's got this claim that he solved the 3-body problem, that he understands how the planet Saturn was formed, and so they bring on. So let's say that's somewhat legitimate. There's something he wants to talk about. Plus, he's talking about how he went to like Diddy parties and all sorts of crazy, or he didn't go to Diddy parties, and
he wanted to me.
His man card is still in effect. But the problem was he ended up, having this guy on to talk about, like, if you invite me on and then you have on, somebody who wants to talk about the flat earth, it's really doing me a disservice, right? So I felt like Patrick brought on this guy who knows nothing about Terrence's theory and had his own theory, which is that the universe doesn't have any other forces besides electricity. Okay,
this is what Wei-Ping Yu thought?
This is what Wei-Ping Yu, Dr. Wei-Ping Yu of NASA. Don't forget, he's a NASA scientist. So to his credit, yeah, he puts on his resume, he doesn't speak for NASA. He is not a representative on the podcast of NASA. But in reality, people see NASA scientists. It carries a lot of weight. I almost worked for NASA. I did work for NASA as an undergraduate, and I was almost hired by them as an employee after college. But I realized if I went to NASA after college, my dream, would be complete at age 21, 22. So I said, let me go to grad school, let me get my PhD. And then if they want to pay me, $29,000 back in 1993, they'll want to pay me $33,000, in 2000 when I get my PhD. And by then I decided I didn't want to work for NASA. I wanted to do other things. But in reality, NASA carries a lot of weight. And for that reason, to have on someone like him talking about his own theory, basically it's called the electric universe, that everything in the universe is plasma and currents. And it sounds plausible if you have, a junior high school level education in physics. But the fact of the matter is every single thing he said about science was discredited. And
how was it discredited? I don't know anything about it.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, he's claiming, for example, that the proton is held together by electric and magnetic forces.
Okay.
He's claiming that gravity is electricity and magnetism, not actual gravitational force. He claimed, so he has his own theories about how all these things are structured. Totally nonsensical, completely refuted by all of 20th century and 21st century physics, including quantum mechanics. He claimed that atoms don't have orbitals, quantum mechanics isn't real, they don't have spectra. Some of these things are the most accurately tested observations in all of science, not just in physics, in all of science. So if you go to like Wikipedia and you say, like, what's the most accurately tested theory that we have? It's quantum mechanics. And there are different interpretations of quantum mechanics. We can get into that. But the bottom line is we know for sure that atoms have these properties called orbitals that behave in a probabilistic function, and we can determine how accurately we can measure these things to 14 decimal places. Okay, so a decimal point and then 14 digits later, we have a number. Something like that, like the frequency at which interstellar hydrogen oscillates at back and forth, it flips back and forth because it's just one positive charge, one negative charge. The positive and negative charges oscillate basically or flipping their spins 1.4 billion times per second. But we know that accuracy of 14, it's not just 4 times 10 or 14 billion,
sure.
Or 14, sorry, it's 1.4 billion. We don't just know that to 1.4. We know that to 1.42100527556 out to 14th decimal place. That's exquisite. I mean, it's put that into language that someone could understand. It's more accurate than going from here in New Jersey to the top of the Empire State Building and getting there within an accuracy of 1 human hair. That's more coarse than 14 digits of precision, and the ratio of the distances between here and there. Okay, so it's just astounding how accurate science knows things accurately and precisely. Accurate is how close you are to the correct answer. Precise is how many digits of precision do you have on that number. Okay, so if you're throwing darts at a dartboard and you're trying to hit the bullseye, accuracy is how close you are to the bullseye on average, but you'll never get exactly to the molecule, to the quark, right? So precision is how close do multiple estimates or multiple throws of a dart at the dartboard converge on that right answer.
But accuracy and precision, I'm looking at this from a pure layman's term, are dependent on the variables that you have at your disposal to come up with that. If the variables change, is it possible, and I'm not just picking out this one example, but is it possible that something that would have been perceived to be accurate down to a human hair suddenly goes up in smoke?
No, it won't be that something that's accurate. If it's truly accurate at that value, you're saying you've measured it to that value. Let me give you an example. You mentioned this in your podcast, which was awesome, with Claudia Durham about
thank you.
gravity. And you actually mentioned it as a compliment to me. So you're actually, I should be thanking me instead of thanking you. But you mentioned that we measured this thing and we thought it was worthy of the biggest Nobel Prize ever in history. That was the discovery of the quantum origin of the universe called inflation. But in reality, we found schmutz, these microscopic meteorite particles that you get if you go to my website, briankeating.com. You got one? You got yours there? This is for your producer, super producer Joey. I got one for him too after the episode. So we were actually measuring these microscopic meteorites that form this twisting pattern that led us to the confirmation bias assumption that we had detected the spark that had ignited the Big Bang. Okay, we actually measured that exquisitely precisely. Okay, so the measurement still stands up, that we measured this pattern to many significant figures, many digits of precision. However, we interpreted, the interpretation was that we measured this inflationary signal. In that sense, we're inaccurate. So something doesn't get more or less accurate. It is what it is, and you can calibrate it and you can become close. So what we had to do is build an entirely new experiment and say that experiment is only going to look for the schmutz, the dust, the crap that we don't want to see. And then by focusing in on what we don't want, then we can subtract it from the total, what we saw, which is cosmic signal plus the dust signal. We have a dust-only signal. So you subtract the dust-only signal from the cosmology plus dust signal, and what you're left with would be the cosmic signal. When we did that subtraction, we came up with nothing. Okay, so that means that the original thing we reported as being only cosmological was actually mostly, or if not all, dust. Okay, so that's an example of how you got more accurate over time, but you had to do a whole new other experiment. And that experiment can't measure the same thing that you want to detect. Okay, so you want to detect dark energy, dark matter. You have to build a separate experiment that traces and tracks out, well, how could I fool myself? How could I have effed up by making a mistake, by tricking myself into thinking that I found out about what I was trying to look for? And this is a big problem for people like the UFO hunters and so forth. They only propose one hypothesis, and then everything can only be used to justify and further increase confidence in the hypothesis.
It's confirmation bias.
So it's prone to confirmation bias. It's not saying that's wrong or that they're lying or whatever, but let's say, for example, you could have an alternative hypothesis and then you want to do an experiment on that. So let's say one of the alternative hypotheses is it's just lasers, and people are shooting lasers off of swamp gas, and that these trained pilots are seeing lasers on swamp gas. And aren't they stupid? Okay, that's a hypothesis. You can test that scientifically, and you could falsify. You could say, oh, no, it's not that. There's no such thing. The drones flying over New Jersey, those weren't drones. Those were something else. You hypothesized they were drones. So what do? We built a whole bunch of FLIR systems, and we saw all these things doing flip-flops on TikTok. And no, that wasn't a drone. So now you've excluded one hypothesis. But because you excluded that one hypothesis, cat lasers, swamp gas, and drones, that doesn't mean that the alternative hypothesis is true.
That's right.
You have to do another experiment to see how could you mislead yourself to think that these are UAPs. And that could be other things. It could be, well, there's actually much more complicated phenomena called social science engineering, where the government's effing with the minds of these people in order to root out who's being loyal to the U.S. government. That's a hypothesis, right? Yeah. And in fact, it may be the true one, that they are actually, the Pentagon was misleading people. They were tricking the pilots. They were doing this and that. That's actually thousands of times in terms of probabilistic space more likely. It doesn't mean that they're right or these people are lying. It just means that, like, what's more likely? Interstellar beings are traveling across interdimensional distances in order to do almost nothing on Earth and slightly hide their behavior on Earth, or or that these things are figments of people's imaginations or injected into them or hypnotized or whatever, those are much more likely. It doesn't mean they're wrong. It doesn't mean that they think that they're lying and that they know that they're lying. It's just that, is that a more simple explanation? If so, we have to consider it.
Thank you guys for checking out this clip. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe and hit the like button on this video. It is a huge, huge help. And if you'd like to check out this clip's full podcast episode, that link is in the description below or right here. And finally, you can follow me on Instagram and X by using the links in my description below.